Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to day two of Love Data Week 2024. My name is Fran Callaghan, and I'm the Research Data Management Librarian here in Maynooth University. And this session, we'll be talking about managing and sharing your qualitative data. It's largely applicable to quantitative data as well, save for a few repository recommendations towards the end. So there's 8 steps that we're going to look at today. It may seem like quite a bit, but I suppose the good news is that at each and every step, there is help and support from the Research Data Management Service in the library at each of these steps. And at a very high level, we're going to look at them all in more depth, but at a very high level, step one is to figure out what data sharing means for your project. So what will be shared and what won't be shared. Step two is to estimate a budget for data management and sharing. The emphasis here is on estimate. Step three is to identify potential locations for data storage and for data sharing. And there is a difference here between data storage and data sharing. And I think researchers tend to appreciate that a little better than perhaps library staff do sometimes. Step four is to capture the outputs from steps 1, 2, and 3 into a data management plan. And again, the RDM service in the library is particularly keen to help at step 4. Steps 1 to 4 typically tend to occur as early, or we would recommend for them to happen as early as possible in the research life cycle. Of course, the research life cycle is not as perfectly linear, or certainly not as perfectly circular as it's often presented. But we would recommend that steps 1 to 4 should happen as early in the project as possible. Steps 5 to 8 can happen later on. Step 5 is to relate it to step 3. It's to actually select a data repository and execute deposit agreements and prepare your data for uploading and sharing. Step 6 is to anonymize your shared data. Step 7, deposit your data. And then step 8 is to promote, share, and track usage of your data. So let's look at each of these steps in a bit more detail. Step 1 is identifying what to share. And what you'll need to do is almost like sorting laundry at this point. You'll need to identify the data that you'll have in one of 4 piles. There'll be data you need to retain privately and secretly. That's to comply with, say, Maynooth University's data retention policy, or perhaps a funder mandate. There'll be data you'll need to destroy, particularly in qualitative data in the social sciences. There will be data that you will undertake to destroy to protect the anonymity of participants and that kind of thing. And then there'll be data you'll share. There's data you'll be happy to share openly, and there's data you'll be happy to share, but with some restriction, not openly. Typically, those restrictions will apply to the reuser of the data. So you may specify that a requester would need to be a current staff or student at a university, or maybe need to be undertaking a certain course of study, or may need to have or to hold a PhD in let's say, conflict resolution or a related discipline. So you need to identify into 4 piles the data you'll share openly, share with restriction, destroy, and retain. Then there are identify supporting documents and metadata. These will typically be things like blank consent forms, your study descriptions, your data collection and analysis instruments, and your code books and README files. It falls down into 2 broad categories: the consent forms, which will put people's mind at rest, particularly your repository manager and your reusers, that you've given proper cognizance to the study design and the privacy of your participants. And then the other supporting documentation falls into metadata and standards. So that's code books and README files. But you will need to share them in conjunction with your data sets. Step two, estimate a budget. And we do put the emphasis here on estimate. It's notoriously difficult to come up with hard and fast numbers at this stage of a research project. And we do recognize that. So it's really just to give some cognizance to what kind of budgets and what kind of spends, what budget spends you may need to consider during the course of your project. The first thing to do is assess your funder requirements for OA publishing and data sharing. So that's where your funder will say all of your project outputs should be open. That's both publications and data sets. And these are the way we want you to do it. And these are restrictions that we will allow and the restrictions we won't allow. For example, embargoes. Identify skills gaps in yourself and in your team. So that can be in terms of anonymization or metadata. And then, again, the emphasis is on estimate a budget for staff training to close those skills gaps in the team, to cover open access fees for open access publishing, which could be mandated by your funder, your live data storage, and your data archiving. So again, that dichotomy between live data and post-project data. You will need to store your data and store your data securely. You will need to share it with some participants in your project, but not all of them. And then in terms of data archiving, you may have a requirement, or you may set out to say, okay, well, we're going to keep all of the data, every single screed of the data we collect, we're going to keep it for a minimum of 15 years. So then you need to give cognizance to kind of, well, what costs would that involve, and how do we propose to cover those costs right now at this point? Assess funder supports for all of the above. So a lot of the open access fees and the data archiving costs are put upon you by open access mandates from funders. But funders typically don't put mandates in isolation. They will also put supports in combination with those mandates. So at this point, you can kind of go, okay, so we plan to produce 4 journal publications. We need to make all 4 of them open access. And we plan at this point to publish in journal title A, B, C, and D. What are the open access costs, and what can we do in terms of going back to the funder to cover those costs? So your funder can help with some of those costs, and you can remove them from your overall budget or account for them in your overall budget. And then the university can also support in terms of open access fees, data sharing fees, and also live data storage fees. So what we're talking about here is, for example, the APC waiver schemes available from the library via IRL. IT costs can be covered by the use of university supplied and guaranteed IT storage solutions. So rather than saying we need to budget for a Dropbox, we're going to buy that and it's going to be this size and we need to keep it for 10 years. You may be able, and it may be preferable and more advantageous to use university supplied and guaranteed IT services that come at no additional cost to you. And also in terms of mural, so you can be strategic here about your APC waivers. So now you're thinking, if I need to support OA fees for these 4 journal publications, what can A, my funder do to ameliorate those costs? What can B, the library do in terms of providing APC waivers? And then for anything else that I can't get an APC waiver, and those APC waiver schemes, by the way, can be kind of tricky in terms of they can run out of waivers at particular times of the year. So you need to be thinking strategically from the very outset about what you plan to publish and how you're going to pay for those open access fees. And then remember, mural is your green route. So if all else is lost, please retain your author accepted manuscript and use the green route, which is to upload it to that author accepted manuscript to mural. And then once you've eliminated any costs that you can, that the university through the IT services of the library or that your funder can cover, well, then you need to budget for all the outstanding items. Step 3, list potential storage locations. So again, we have this difference here between live research data and archived research data. In terms of live research data, a few things that you should be cognizant of is estimate your volumes. Again, a bit like budget, it can be difficult, but we're not expecting you to nail down to the nearest megabyte what you plan. Data sets can shrink or grow, and as long as you're aware of that and making provision for that in your data management plan, that's fine. And really, we're asking really about estimates here. Is it going to be less than a gigabyte? Is it going to be in the order of terabytes? Is it somewhere between 50 and 75 gigabytes? That kind of territory is what we're asking for. List the file formats you propose to use, and where possible, use open file formats. If you're planning to share and archive this data post-project, you need to be mindful of the fact that the people who may reuse your data sets may not have access to the same IT resources that we have. So they may not have access to MS Office, but they can have access to things like Star Office and Open Office, which are open source alternatives. So really try to use open file formats where possible. Not only will this make it more reusable, but it will also tick a big box for your funder if you've got funder requirements in terms of your data management plan. Use university supplied and guaranteed storage solutions. We've talked about that already. So use Teams, use OneDrive. They are guaranteed. There's a service level. The university pay for these services. They're not free. And so they're backed up in real time. So you don't need to set an alarm on your phone for every Friday at 4 p.m. to say, okay, make sure you back up all your files before you go home for the weekend. They're backed up in real time and transparently and in the background. And then ameliorate any security threats. So where you don't have access to your OneDrive or your Teams folder, if you're in the field, if you've where you've got no Wi-Fi or whatever, be aware that you may need, if you're recording interviews with people who have survived conflict or abuse or whatever, very sensitive topics, that you will need to record those interviews on secure laptops and not as something like, an open dictaphone where if you lost that the data could be recovered and those people could be identified. There's an element, I suppose, here of like teaching your granny to suck eggs. All researchers, particularly social sciences and qualitative data researchers, would be very well aware of this. And then for archivable and researchable, shareable research data, identify a list of where you may deposit your data sets when it comes to it, when you've collated these data sets. And here we'd recommend use of re3 data. So re3 data is a directory of data repositories, and there's hundreds of data repositories in here. And re3 data will help you not only identify them, but also assess their requirements. So some data repositories will require you to adhere to certain metadata formats and certain data formats and certain metadata standards. And not all repositories in re3 data may be suitable for disciplinary reasons. So they can be subject specific repositories. They may not be in the correct geographical region. So for instance, you could have the Canadian National Database of microbe samples or something like that. And clearly that wouldn't be suitable as a deposit space for Irish researchers. And then some of them, and not many, but some of them have some associated costs with them. Even if you don't identify a potential target for your data set where you may want to upload your data set in re3 data, please bear it in mind as data sources, as reusable data sources that you can use in your research. So not only as a depositor, but you can also identify repositories that you can use as a downloader. So it's a very useful tool. Consider then two repositories in particular, the European Data Portal, Zenodo, and the Irish Qualitative Data Archive, IQDA. And I'll talk about those further in a short while. And then again, the element of teaching your granny to suck eggs, get ethics approval for all your plans to share data sets. But of course, any researcher will do that anyway. And then step 4, capture the outputs of steps 1 to 3 in a data management plan. And again, steps 1 to 4, the RDM service are very happy to help. Determine if your funder has specific requirements for a data management plan, if you have a funder, and these will be specified in the call document. Not all funders specify particular templates or guidelines or requirements for their data management plan. And in the absence of a specific requirement or template, it is something of a double-edged sword, because on one hand, you're thinking, okay, well, I don't have particular things that I need to be aware of or demonstrate in my data management plan. There's no, additional gates I have to jump or boxes I have to tick for this particular funder. But on the other hand, it leaves you with no guidance, guidelines, and particularly no template. In that case, we'd always recommend using the Science Europe guidance and the Science Europe template. Despite the name, it is suitable for qualitative social sciences. It's not just a STEM template. And it is, from my mind, the best template you would apply if you didn't specifically have to apply a particular template. And then use that template and a DMP drafting tool, such as, for example, DMP Online, which will help demystify drafting the data management plan. A problem people often come to us in the RDM service with is, I've opened up Word, I've got a blank document, and I don't know what to start typing. And this will take that away from you, because DMP Online, in conjunction with a template such as the Science Europe template, will prompt you by asking you questions and guide you on how to answer those questions, and then spit out the back end a PDF, which is essentially your data management plan. And then again, consult the library's RDM service. That's Fran Callaghan at mu.ie for help and guidance on drafting a DMP. And when you have drafted your DMP and you're pretty happy with it, please feel free to submit it for review to the RDM service. And what I'll do then is apply evaluation rubric. So for Science Europe has a particular Science Europe evaluation rubric that I can kind of say, okay, have they addressed this question properly? Is this a good answer? And we can critique it and tweak your data management plan in advance of submitting it to your funder. Then you can this is where the fun stuff happens. This is where the study happens. This is where you convene your focus groups, you conduct your interviews, you put all the data into SPSS or Python or whatever, and you get interesting conclusions out the back. And then towards the end of the project, then we come back to step 5, which is select a data repository. So this is a corollary of step 3, where you've identified potential repositories. Now you're narrowing it down to one. Where am I actually going to deposit the data set? If the repository has a curator or moderator, contact them and they'll be able to do an element of hand-holding about what requirements the repository will have. Repositories should be able to provide you with some support. So even if you don't have a dedicated human contact, they should be able to provide you with how-to documents, YouTube videos, supporting documentation that help you deposit your data set there. This is the important part: review and complete the data sharing agreement. The data sharing agreement covers what the responsibilities and the roles of both the depositor and the repository are. So it may be that some of the data sets can be immediately open access. Some of them need to be restricted. They need to be restricted for a certain period of time. What the repository then is free to do with them. And all of that is kind of the legal stuff, but it's really quite vital that you get that nailed down properly with your repository. Good repositories provide persistent identifiers, for example, data DOIs. There are other types of PIDs available, but data DOIs are probably the most pervasive now. So choose a repository that will provide you with some kind of a PID, preferably a DDOI. And then choose an appropriate reuse license. For an example, a Creative Commons reuse license. Again, we're happy to talk to you about reuse licenses and which one would be the appropriate one for your data set. So please come back to us at this point if you're looking for support. And then collate and prepare for deposit your earlier supporting documentation, like your blank consent forms, your study descriptions, your code books, your README files, and all of those supporting documents. Step 6, anonymize your data. Of course, considerations for anonymization should have started prior to the commencement of your study. So anonymization really should be built in to your study design to eliminate any potential for identification of participants from the very start. This step really refers to how to complete the anonymization. So any outstanding anonymization tasks now need to be carried out. Here's some suggested tools and resources for anonymization. The ARX data anonymization tool is available here. It's a free open source software tool that you can use to de-identify participants in your study. Amnesia from OpenAIRE. So OpenAIRE is a European Research Council initiative. So Amnesia has the kind of imprimatur of the European Union, if you want. And that's another tool for de-identifying participants. The Irish Qualitative Data Archive and Maynooth University in conjunction have the anonymisation protocol version 5. So that's a PDF which will talk you through anonymisation. And then finally, the UK anonymisation network provides hints, tips, that kind of support for anonymisation as well. The DRI, the Digital Repository of Ireland, via Dr. Aileen O'Carroll of Maynooth University, often provide anonymisation classes as well. So you should keep an eye out for those on the DRI list. Step 7, this is where things start to get a bit more straightforward. Deposit your data. Hopefully it can be mediated through a repository curator, a contact, somebody who works for the repository who'll be able to guide you on all of that stuff. Remember also deposit your metadata. So really you have data sets and supporting documentation and metadata. And you have supporting documentation such as consent forms. So consent forms are very important, that reusers of your data can be assured that your experiment design was of the highest standard, and that the participants agreed via a plain language statement that they were happy enough for their data to be reused. And then group your data. So it typically in Zenodo, that would be via communities, or in IQDA via collections. And that just allows you to bunch up all of your data sets into a little bucket that says all of these data sets relate to this project or this topic or this school or this research center. And then note your data DOIs so that you can link then your publications. So you have your open access publications in your institutional repository or elsewhere. You can then link the related data sets to the publications. So people who stumble across your publications, read your publications, can then easily find a data DOI to say, okay, I'll take that data set as well. And then, the final step is just remember to promote your data sets. Treat your data sets just like publications. They're research outputs. Data DOIs for data sets are just like publication DOIs for journal articles. They're a very quick, easy way for you to share your data sets and your publications. Use social media to promote your newly archived data sets in the same way that you would if you published a journal article in a prestigious journal. You would want to tweet about it and you want to let everyone know. The same is true of your data sets. List your recent DDOIs in email signatures and at your thank you slides at the end of a conference presentation. Include your data DOIs along with your publication DOIs. The reason all of that is important is because you should cite data sets that you use, but equally you should expect citations when others reuse your data in the same way that you would expect citations to your journal articles. If people use the articles, you would expect citations to your data sets from people who reuse your data. And then most data repositories, in the same way as publication repositories, will record and allow you to access download figures or views. So you can get views and downloads for your data sets, which can help in promotions or interviews, and just to demonstrate research impact. So that's our steps 1 to 8 in data sharing. Before we wrap up, I just want to quickly talk about two of the data repositories that are particularly of use or particular of interest to Irish researchers, and particularly Irish qualitative data, social sciences data researchers. The first one is Zenodo. Zenodo is owned by the European Research Council and operated by CERN. So the people who are obsessed with building ever-increasing circles underneath Switzerland. They run Zenodo on behalf of the European Union. It's automatically mints data DOIs for all data sets, which is brilliant. You don't have to worry about how am I going to get a data DOI. You upload your data set into Zenodo and it will automatically be assigned a data DOI. It's free to use. Again, as I say, it's paid for by the European Research Council. It's multidisciplinary. But there's no mediated deposit or support. So you're pretty much on your own. Now it's really, really very easy. And again, myself in the RDM service are very au fait with using Zenodo and happy to help you to get used to Zenodo. It's quite straightforward, but there is no mediated support. So there's nobody at the other end, at the Zenodo end, helping you. And then finally, the Irish Qualitative Data Archive, which is now operated by Maynooth University Library. So the IQDA staff who are there to help you are MU Library staff. It's hosted by the Digital Repository of Ireland, which is a Core Trust Seal approved repository. Really, what that means in layman's terms is that the DRI, the Digital Repository of Ireland, has had to demonstrate gold standard practices for digital repositories and been independently assessed and awarded the Core Trust Seal. So basically, you can trust the DRI. It also automatically mints data DOIs for all of its data sets. It's also free to use, but rather than being multidisciplinary, it has a social sciences focus and is almost exclusively qualitative data. Almost, because there are small fragments of data that would be considered quantitative data in there. But really what we're talking about is small, essentially Excel files, which could have, for example, wellness scores. So participants may rate how they feel their wellness is on a score of 1 to 10 every day or something like that. So it is literally quantitative data. It is a score of 1 to 10. It's in an Excel file, but really it is complementary to the qualitative data. So there's small fragments of quantitative data in there. It has better local visibility. Local is in the international sense, which means that IQDA is of a national importance and of national interest and would tend to pique the interest of Irish social scientists. And it has mediated deposit and support via the IQDA curators, which are, again, MU Library staff. So you can reach out to people and they will be your conduit to uploading your data into IQDA, and they can help to get your data into the right format, make sure your consent forms are right, make sure the data deposit agreement is understood and everyone's happy with that. So there is mediated deposit and support. And I think with that, I can open the floor to questions.